everyone. This is Tanya Milling with the Arc of Virginia. I want to welcome you today to this session, and I want to start by thanking the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities provided some of the funding for today's session. So we are grateful for that. And I'm actually going to test out some features that I have not used before as part of the grant funding. The federal requirements requires that we ask some questions, that we get some information about people who have come to our sessions. So for this one, I'm going to send out a poll. This is going to show up on your screen, and if you will answer this for me, it'll be very helpful. We have a couple to go through. So which of these describes you? It says on the screen, you just simply click person with a disability, a family member, a provider, or perhaps advocate or professional, or other. And we'll wait a few minutes until everyone gets a chance. And when you're more than one of these, just pick the one that you identify most with, simply because I got a question in the chat box, because that's how it's set up. Sorry about that. I haven't learned those features. About 67% of the folks here with us have voted. We're at 70%. Thanks for bearing with me while I do this. This is my first time. Okay. All right, well, thank you for that. And now, sometimes the feds ask us questions that can seem a little awkward, so we're just going to quickly work through this and see if we can, thank you, if we can launch another poll, which is information about you. So if you're a person with a developmental disability and you just checked that, we're looking, in this case, you can check more than one thing. Tell us your gender, maybe how you identify in your race, and where you live, what describes where you live. Oops, I haven't hit the launch button. So we have the several things listed at the top, and then we have urban and rural. Urban means we're living more in a big city, and rural out in the country. And we have to report it separately, so thank you for your patience on this. I'll wait just another moment, and again, this is for our guests and attendees who identify as having a developmental disability. And we're going to do the exact same poll in a second as those who identify as family members of a person with a disability. This was my best way of figuring out how to do this. Okay. And now I'm going to ask those same questions of family members. And then I'm going to leave you alone, okay? For now. We appreciate this because we know that we appreciate our funders, and we know that with funding, strings come attached, not from the Virginia Board, but from the feds. So we're appreciative of all of that. Excellent. So while you're finishing that up, I'll tell you who's with us today, which is Jonathan Martinez. He is the Senior Director of Law and Policy with Syracuse University, and he's going to present today on supported decision making. I am going to hand it right over to you, Jonathan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Tanya, and thank you everyone for joining us here today to talk about one of my favorite things in the world, what I think is the most important advance for people with disabilities since the Americans with Disabilities Act. And what we're talking about today is supported decision-making. You may have heard of supported decision-making. If you have, you've heard about it as an alternative to guardianship, something that people can do instead of being in a guardianship, and that's true. We are absolutely going to talk about that today. But what I want you to know, and what I want you to learn today and tomorrow, I'm speaking tomorrow at 2, are all the ways that supported decision-making can help people have a better life, an improved quality of life, a more independent life. But before I begin, I want to give you two promises. I always make the same two promises every time I speak. This is the first promise. Yes, supported decision-making is recognized as an alternative to guardianship. But no, you will not hear me say today or ever that no one should ever be in a guardianship. That's not my point in being here today. My point today is to give you information that you can use if you ever have to decide whether or not guardianship is right. Second promise, everything you hear me say today and tomorrow is going to be backed by one of two things. First, law, and second, science. So let's begin. The first thing I want you to do is think about your rights. If you are a person without disabilities, if you are temporarily able-bodied, as I call it, you don't think about your rights very often because you just have them. We take our rights for granted. But for now, I want you to think about the ones that are most important to you, the ones that make you who you are and proud to be an American and a Virginian. Think about freedom of speech and religion. Think about the right to vote. Think about the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now think about what all those rights have in common, and that's choice. All of our rights come down to choice. Freedom of speech is the right to choose what to say. Freedom of religion is the right to choose how, where, and whether we worship. Voting is the right to choose who will govern us. Choice is what makes our rights useful. Without choice, there are no rights. So I always say the most important right we have is the right to make choices. Clinically, that's sometimes called self-determination. It's a big scientific-y word, but I want you to think about when you hear self-determination, think making choices. People who have self-determined make decisions about themselves and their lives. They are the ones who decide what they're going to do, where they're going to work, what kinds of life they're going to live. As you can see on your screen, they are causal agents. They are the ones that make things happen in their lives. And here's something that we know. From 40 years of studies, we know this. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities who have more self-determination, who make more choices, have better lives. We know this from study after study after study. There's just a few up on your screen right now. But we know that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who make more choices are more likely to work, more likely to live in their communities, more likely to be healthy, more likely to be happier, more likely to be safer. So now with that in mind, think about this. Those rights that are so important to you, are they worth anything if you're not allowed to use them? What if someone says to you, yes, of course, you have the right to vote if I take you to the polls, and then you're only going to vote for who I tell you to vote for? What if someone says you have the right to speak, but you're only going to speak when I tell you to, and you're only going to say what I say you can? Are those rights? When that happens to you, when you lose your right to make choices, aren't you losing the most important parts of being an American? Well, that is exactly, and I mean exactly, what we have done to people with disabilities for the last 1,500 years. Back in ancient Rome, when they first wrote the laws down, literally the first time they got all the laws together in one place in ancient Rome, 1,500 years ago, was a book called the Justinian Code. And in the Justinian Code, remember, first time the laws were written down, there was a law that said, if you are feeble-minded, and that is what they called people with disabilities, you had to have a curator over you to make decisions for you. And that began what I call a culture that assumes that people who need help can't do things, that people with disabilities can't do things if they need help to do things. And that culture has continued ever since. In England, where we got most of our laws before the revolution, they updated the Justinian Code. What they said was that if you are an idiot or a lunatic, and that is what they called people with disabilities, You had to have a committee over you to make decisions for you. Here in America, we've just called that guardianship. Now look, guardianship works differently in every state because every state has its own laws, and I'm going to show you Virginia's law later, but all the laws essentially work the same. If a judge decides that I can't make some or all of the decisions in my life, then the judge is supposed to take away from me the right to make the choices that I can't make and give them to someone else, like, say, Tanya. In that case, Tanya becomes my guardian, and she gets the power to do what I truly cannot. And if that's the way guardianship worked, I'd have no problem with it. But here's the problem, and this is, again, something that we know from studies and studies. More than 90% of guardianships take away all rights from people. They take away all rights, whether or not the person can exercise those rights. Those are called full guardianships or plenary guardianships. And we know that's 90% of the time. No matter what you can do, no matter what you want, they simply take away all rights. And the result is that guardians have incredible power going to the most personal areas of a person's life, where they go, what they do, who they see, whether they get health care, whether they work, how they live. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if that's what a person truly needs. But what it is an important thing. Because when rights as important as those are at stake, we cannot just be acting, as I call it, reflexively. You have a disability, therefore you have to have a guardian. That's when it gets scary, because we know, just like we know from 40 years of studies, that when people have more self-determination, they have better lives. We also know that when people lose self-determination, when they lose their right to make choices, their lives get worse. We've known since the 70s that people who lose their choices can feel helpless, hopeless, and self-critical. And that's not rocket science. If you're told time and time again that you can't do something, and you're feeling particularly motivated to try, no, of course not. That's why we know that people who lose control over their lives can have lower self-esteem, can have less ability to function. They can feel inadequate. So as I always say, we have to be careful. Guardianship isn't a bad thing. But when we have what I call overbroad and undue guardianships, guardianships over people who don't need them, or who don't need as many rights taken away as are taken away, things get very dangerous because the science says it can make people's lives worse. And that's a problem that we've known about for decades. There's a quote up on your screen right now, and that quote is from 1998. It was done by a congressman named Claude Pepper. See, Congressman Pepper chaired the first congressional committee to look into guardianships, the House Select Committee on Aging. They also looked at people with disabilities, and they looked at guardianships. They looked at people under guardianship. They looked at guardianship orders. They looked at guardianship laws. And this is what they found. On your screen is page 1, paragraph 1 of what they found. Take a look at it with me together. It says, the typical ward, person under guardianship, has fewer rights than the typical convicted felon. When people are under guardianship, especially overbroad and undue guardianships, they've got someone in their lives who has the power to say where they go, what they do, who they see, whether they get medical care, and sometimes when they die. As the congressman said, that's the most severe penalty that can be levied against an American citizen, short of the death penalty, in his words. So where do we go from here? I made you a promise, I'm going to keep it. I am not here to say there should never be guardianships. Obviously, there are times when guardianship is appropriate. When a person is so disabled or so unable to make decisions that they cannot take part in the process, of course, guardianship is appropriate. When a person does not want to be part of the process and is putting him or herself at risk, that's definitely a time when guardianship is appropriate. When there is no one available in an emergency to give help, a temporary guardianship is appropriate. So I'm not here to say there should never be guardianships, but what I am here to say is there should never be guardianships just because you have a disability, or just because you need help, or just because you have a particular diagnosis, or the two at the bottom of your screen right now that get me really worried, because that's the way it's always been, and because it's for your own good. Those are two I hear time and time again. This is just what we do. People with disabilities have to have guardians, or it's for your own good. I hear that in every state I go to. I hear it time and again. If this person doesn't have a guardianship, my son, my daughter, my mother, my friend, if they don't have a guardian, they might do something they shouldn't do or sign something they shouldn't sign. They might get taken advantage of. They have something bad could happen. They might make a mistake. It's for their own good. Now remember, that's in the face of 40 years of studies that say how bad it is to lose self-determination. But you know what I've learned is that people out there mean well. This culture that we've had for 1,500 years, it comes from a good place. 99.9% of people seeking guardians are parents or loved ones who just want someone protected. They mean well. But we got to realize that when we mean well is when we have to be the most careful. There's a quote up on your screen from the US Supreme Court. This one is almost 100 years old, 92. And here's what it says. When we mean the most well, we have to be the most careful. The greatest dangers to liberty are in the encroachment by people of zeal who are well-meaning but don't understand. When we mean the most well but don't understand the consequences, excuse me, when we don't understand what bad things can happen, that's when things get dangerous. I hear it all the time, like I said. If a person doesn't have a guardian, they might do something they shouldn't do or sign something they shouldn't sign. And whenever I hear that, I ask them to think about their own lives. I ask them to think if they've ever signed a mortgage or signed a lease. I know I have. I've closed on my mortgage like 6 times. I've refinanced a bunch of times. And every time the same thing happens. It probably happened to you if you've done this. You sat around a big table and there were people around the table, the seller, the agent, the lawyer. If you're lucky, you had an agent. But here's one thing that's at every closing, a stack of papers almost up to the ceiling. And you get handed those papers one at a time after time, and you're told, sign them. And I always ask people, did you read them first? Because I didn't. So what you did, if you did not read them, and most people do not, is you put hundreds of thousands of dollars of your money and 30 years of your life in the hands of a bank that may or may not be under indictment. You don't know because you didn't read. That means you signed something you shouldn't sign. Don't you need a guardian? Or I asked them to think of whether they've ever had surgery. I have. And think about what happened when you went into surgery. I can tell you what happened to me. I got wheeled into the surgery center with my heart rate going 1,000 miles an hour. And I had people I never met before getting in my face, speaking medical jargon. I'm your doctor, I'm your nurse, I'm your anesthesiologist. And all of them handed me papers one at a time. And all of them said the same thing, sign them. I ask, were you like me and didn't read them first? Because if you were like me and you didn't read them first, you probably waived your right to sue. You definitely put your lives in the hands of strangers. Don't you need a guardian? Because you did something you shouldn't have done. So if we're talking about things like that, we have to look at our own lives. Now think about this. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Have you ever played my favorite game in the last few months? And that's have a bunch of drinks and gone on Amazon? I know I have. You wake up, you find out what's at your doorstep the next day. And if you've done that, done retail therapy, you have bought things you should not have bought. Now think for a second about other experiences in your life. Have you ever had a bad relationship and learned what a good one is? Have you ever rescued a buddy or been a rescue buddy? Have you ever woken up after a long night and said, I am never going to do that again? Kind of glad I did. It's a learning experience. If you've done any of those things, then think about your lives. You've signed things you shouldn't have signed. You've done things you shouldn't have done. You've met people you shouldn't have met. You've had experiences that put yourself in danger. You have made mistakes. Don't you need a guardian? Of course not. Because those things, those mistakes, those experiences, they made you stronger. They made you smarter. Making those bad choices taught you what good choices are. They taught you the kind of person you wanted to be. They taught you the kind of things you do and don't want to do. Making mistakes are the most important things we can do, because our mistakes shape us. They help us grow. So when we say a person needs a guardian because they may make a mistake, because they may sign something they shouldn't sign or do something they shouldn't do, aren't we really saying that they shouldn't grow? They shouldn't have the same opportunities as everyone else? They shouldn't have the same chances to make the same mistakes, to have the same growth as everyone else? I'll give you one more example. Think about the year 1995. 1995, if you weren't, I'm meeting more and more people who weren't born in 1995 or were in grade school. And I always say to them this: I hate you. Everyone else who can remember 1995, think about it. 1995 was only 5 years after the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. It was 4 years before the Olmstead decision that said people with disabilities had the right to live in the community. So in 1995, it was perfectly okay to say to a person with disabilities, you will live in an institution. You have no choice. In 1995, a sheltered workshop where people with disabilities worked for less than minimum wage in a segregated setting was not only legal, it was thought of as a good thing. Schools and vocational rehabilitation agencies could brag about the people they placed in sheltered workshops. In 1995, we didn't have waivers and services and supports like we do now. Now, fast forward to today, just 25 years. And in that time, now, the right to live in the community is protected by the United States Supreme Court. People with disabilities have an absolute right to be full and equal members of their community. Integrated employment at competitive wages is an expectation, and someday, God willing, I will say that it is a right. We now have programs, we now have services and supports. Think about the phone that you may be looking at right now. Your phone, your cell phone, is not just a telephone. It's a connector. You can connect with your doctors. You can set reminders to take medication. You can check your budget. You can involve other people and share information. The phones you carry allow you to connect with the people in your life and your professionals like your doctors. I have a person I worked with. She has a traumatic brain injury and diabetes. And she is exactly the type of person who would have been in an institution in 1995 because sometimes she forgets to look after her blood levels. You know what she's got? She's got a free app, free on her phone, that connects to her monitor. So when her glucose levels get dangerous, it sends her a text telling her to eat something. If it gets below that, it texts her mother, her sister, her doctor, so they can step in and help. In other words, with a free app, she can now live independently and work independently, and she does. So now, with all that in mind, isn't it fair to say that we have more ways to make more people more independent than ever? And how come the number of people under guardianship has tripled since 1995? Just since 1995, 1 million more people have gone into guardianship. And we know from studies that more than 90% of them have lost all of their rights. And before you think to yourself, it's because we're getting older as a society, that's not it. The National Council on Disability just released a study that almost 60% of the people going into guardianship are between 18 and 25 and have intellectual or developmental disabilities. In other words, because we have meant well, we have taken away the rights of 18-year-olds that they'll never get back. Is that what we want to be doing? Because the research is terrifying. We know that people who are under overbroad and undue guardianships, that can have a significant negative impact on their physical and mental health. In many cases, they live less long. They function less well. They feel worse. On the other hand, we know that when people have more self-determination, they have a better quality of life. You know, the number one reason I ever hear why people need a guardian is safety. If I don't get a guardian, my son or my daughter they might get hurt. They might get abused or neglected. And I never criticize a parent for wanting to protect his or her child. That is the first obligation of every parent. But I do talk about science. And I want you to think about science for a second. There's a study up on your screen by a professor named Dr. Kemke in New York. She's worked a whole bunch of her life on looking at the relationship between safety and self-determination. This is just one of the studies she did. What she did was she worked with women with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And if you don't know this, you should. Women with intellectual and developmental disabilities are way, way, way more likely to be abused and neglected than any other demographic. It is terrifying. So what Dr. Kemke did was she worked with a group of women with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And this was a group that had similar abilities and limitations. I am not a scientist. I call it apples to apples. They looked at people who had similar abilities and similar limitations. And what she did was she divided them up in half. She called one side an experimental group and one side a control group. The experimental group was given access to a course, a curriculum, that was designed to increase self-determination. The control group was told to go live their lives. When the course was done, she brought them back together and she gave them a test, a recognized test, designed to measure how well people recognize abusive situations and avoid abuse. You know what she found? Apples to apples, remember. The ones with more self-determination were better able to recognize abuse. They were better able to avoid abuse. They were safer. I have told judges across this country this same message. If you want to keep people safe, don't take away their rights. Build their self-determination. And that's not rocket science. Aren't you more protective of what you know is yours? If you know something belongs to you, your body, your choices, your life, aren't you going to protect it more? So build that, build self-determination. And here is the study I think is, frankly, the cherry on top of the sundae. This is called the National Core Indicators Study. It was done in every state and Virginia. What it measured, was the quality of life of people with disabilities. And like Dr. Kemke's study, it was an apples to apples study. They even used the old terms, mild, moderate, and severe disabilities. So they measured people with mild disabilities with other people with mild disabilities. They compared people with moderate to moderate, severe, severe. And what they did was they looked at several variables, several things that could happen, and looked at how it impacted quality of life. One of the things, just one of the things they looked at was whether people had a guardian. And here is what they found in Virginia and every other state. Apples to apples, remember. People without guardians were more likely to work, more likely to live independently, more likely to have friends, more likely to go on dates, and more likely to practice the religion of their choice. You know what? They did that study again. You know what they found? The same things. Apples to apples. People without guardians were more likely to have their own homes, more likely to make choices, more likely to be accepted in their community, more likely to work, more likely to go on dates and get married. Now, I mentioned the Olmsted case before. I mentioned how it says that people with disabilities have a right to be full and equal members of their community. Well, where do you become members of your community? At work, when you're socializing, when you're at church, when you're on dates, when you're meeting your neighbors. If all the Olmsted decision meant was that you didn't have to live in an institution and that you could live in a home in the community where you never got out and did anything, what's the point? So what I'm saying is this shows that the one thing that might be standing in between having this, having the promise of Olmsted, and not having the promise of Olmsted is having a guardian. And if that's true, if we look at the science that says people who don't have guardians are more likely to have this than those who do, it doesn't mean there should never be guardianship, but it means we should think about it. We should be careful. 1,500 years of culture that says people have to have guardians are enough. So where do we go from here? What I've tried to do is show you how self-determination is a good thing, how having and making choices leads to a better life, and how losing choices can be a very bad thing. But that's not the only thing, because self-determination is not just go live your life. It's not go on your own. It's not you get nothing, no help, nothing from anyone. Of course not. Because here's something else we know. People with disabilities sometimes need help. I mean, we all need help. You should have seen me trying to get on this webinar. We need help in everything we do every day. So this is what I say. What we need to do going forward is this. Make sure that people with disabilities have as much self-determination as they can, the maximum control over their lives, because that we know from science leads to a better life. And at the same time, we have to make sure that they, like everyone else, has the help, access to the support they need to exercise their self-determination effectively and safely. And if you agree with me on that, I want to tell you a story. It's a story about a Virginian, Margaret Jenny Hatch. I just spoke with Jenny the other day. Jenny, who's on your screen right now. When I met Jenny in 2013, Jenny was 29. And Jenny had graduated high school. She lived in Hampton, Virginia. She had just finished up her 5th year working at the same job. Not a supported job, not a special job, certainly not a sheltered workshop. Regular job, making regular pay, working regular hours. Jenny had her own apartment, not a supported apartment, not a group home, a regular apartment with a roommate that by all accounts was kept spotlessly. Jenny had friends she hung out with. She was an active political volunteer. She had a church she went to. Here's the thing you need to know about Jenny Hatch. There was nothing special about Jenny Hatch. She had a life just like everyone else. And that's all she wanted, a life like everyone else, and she had it. Till she was riding her bike and got hit by a car, and she needed surgery. And then Jenny found herself on the receiving end of a petition for guardianship filed by her mother and stepfather. So that in August of 2012, before I met Jenny, Jenny walked into a hearing in a courtroom in Newport News, Virginia. And when she walked in, she had every right that everyone else had. She was self-determined. She had a right to make choices. She walked in that courtroom, and 3 hours later, literally 3 hours later, lost all of them. Because when I met Jenny in February of 2013, Jenny was under an order that had put her in quote unquote temporary guardianship that had no endpoint. Jenny had gone from living in her own apartment to living in a group home. It was a nice group home. I went there. It was behind barbed wire. Jenny went from having her own job, making regular wages, working regular hours, to being required to work in the sheltered workshop attached to that group home, where she made pennies on the hour. I saw her pay slips. She worked up to 5 days a week for 8 months, made less than $1,000, I think, the whole time. If you wanted to see Jenny, you had to fill out a permission slip because her cell phone had been taken away. Her laptop had been taken away. Her Facebook password was changed. If you wanted to see or speak with her, you had to fill out a permission slip and give it to the guardians to ask to see Jenny. And on that permission slip, you had to say who you were, why you wanted to see her, what you were going to talk about, and for how long. People never believe me when I say that, so we put it online. If you go to jennyhatchjusticeproject.org, there's a section there called the Justice for Jenny trial. You can see the permission slip because here's the real kicker about the permission slip. You had to agree to follow the rules of the guardianship. And those were on the back of the form. First rule of the guardianship and visitation, you were not allowed to talk to her about her guardianship because it upset her. Do you know why it upset her? Because she did not want to be in guardianship. She wanted to go back and live with her friends, and she was told, no, you live here now, get used to your new life. She wanted to go back to her job where she was welcome to return and was told, no, you work here now, get used to your new life. She wanted to go to her church and was told, no, we go to this church, get used to your new life. So it upset her to be in that guardianship. So the first thing I did when I met Jenny, her lawyer asked me to come visit her, is I guess I broke and entered because I wasn't going to ask permission to meet her. Here's a pro tip. If you talk really fast and carry a briefcase, you can get in anywhere. So I did. I went and visited her. And I said, I'd like to help you. I'd like to be your lawyer. Can I help you? And she said, yes. So I became Jenny's lawyer. And I contacted the lawyer for the guardians. And I said, I'm going to be Jenny's lawyer. The case had gotten a fair amount of attention. So I said, I'd like to ratchet this down. We're going to have a trial. And what I want is for us to try this case. I know you think she needs a guardian. We think she doesn't. Let's just go to court. But I said, I have a question. That whole permission slip thing, it doesn't apply to me, does it? And I was told, yes, it does. And I said, are you saying that I am not allowed to talk to my client about her case? And I was told, no, those are the rules. Now, I want you to think for a second about what that really means. Because if Jenny Hatch was not a person with Down syndrome, but was instead an axe murderer, or even was a person with Down syndrome who was an axe murderer and was caught holding a head and holding an axe and being covered in person and saying, I did it. You know what she'd have the right to do? Talk to a lawyer. But because Jenny wasn't lucky enough to be an axe murderer, but was instead a person under a guardianship, apparently she did not have the same rights as an axe murderer. So we had to file a motion. The very first time I went to court for Jenny, it was just asking the judge to give her the same rights as an axe murderer, just to let her talk to her attorney. And, you know, again, people can't believe this. So again, I say, go to Jenny Hatch Justice Project. You can see the motion I filed, which has the permission slip attached to it. You can read the emails from the attorney for the guardian saying you're not allowed to talk to her. We had to go to court. We had to argue. She has a right to have someone talk to her. And thank God the judge said we had a right to talk to her, because I got to see her file finally. Because I was thinking the same thing you probably are. Why did she need a guardian? So the first thing in the file was the order putting her under guardianship. You can see the last paragraph on your screen right now. I won't bore you with the whole thing, but this is the last thing. Take a look at what it says. The guardians have the power to decide who she sees, what kind of support she gets, what kind of health care she gets, what kind of education and therapy and day treatment she gets, and where she lives. Look at those words. Did Jenny have any rights left? Remember, she walked into a courtroom with all her rights, and 3 hours later walked out with this. Why? Is she even an American anymore at this point? Does she have any of the rights that we hold dear at this point? So that question I asked you when we started about your rights, not as silly as it sounds, did it? Our rights are precious, and she lost all of them in just 3 hours. Why? So I kept reading the file. It turned out there was a court reporter at that 3-hour hearing, and I saw the transcript. The star witness at that hearing was a psychologist who had done an evaluation of Jenny. See, after Jenny had her back surgery, they had a psychologist come in to do what they call a capacity evaluation, to see Jenny's abilities. And then she testified about that, not mentioning that she gave Jenny that evaluation while Jenny was on Percocet. But be that as it may, on your screen, you will see the exact words of that psychologist. She said, when she was asked about Jenny's ability to live independently, well, if Jenny had assistance, she might be able to do that. What about Jenny's legal skills? She would need assistance to understand a document. What about money management? She would need assistance with a bank account. When asked what Jenny really needs, she said she's going to need assistance to make decisions about her healthcare and her life. When asked what Jenny really, really needs, it would be beneficial for Jenny to have people around her who support her and love her and give her assistance. Okay, so the next thing in the file was the power of attorney Jenny had signed when she turned 18, 11 years before. And I'm talking one of the powers of attorney you pull off the internet. It's like that big with the big words. So we asked, if you say that Jenny can't understand things, if you say that Jenny can't make decisions, how did she sign this document? And frankly, I expected her parents to say, well, we thought she could understand it, but she couldn't. So we wanted to give her a chance. Now we know better. But nope, they doubled down. Their exact words are on your screen. They said that Jenny understood it because her attorney explained it to her. She got to know Jenny and let Jenny ask questions and observe Jenny and saw what Jenny needed. And based on those observations, the attorney concluded, and we concurred, that Jenny could understand the document. At trial, they tripled down. They said their doctor agreed Jenny, because she had that help, could understand it. So you know what? I know Jenny really well. I've gotten to know her really well over the last 7 years. And that psychologist was right. Jenny does need help. She absolutely needs assistance to understand legal issues. She absolutely needs assistance with medical care. She absolutely needs assistance with money management and in her day-to-day life. She totally needs assistance. Do you know what that makes her? Human. Jenny's a person. Are we not all Jenny Hatch? We all need assistance every day in every way. There is no one listening to me who never needs assistance in their lives. But here's the big difference, is that when people without disabilities get assistance, they're being smart. Right? They're considered to be smart. But when people with disabilities need assistance, we got 1,500 years of culture that says they have to have guardians. So we had to show that judge that needing assistance, getting help, is perfectly normal. And in fact, it's what we should do. So we talked to the judge about supported decision-making. And the definition of supported decision-making is on your screen right now. I know it, I wrote it. If you Google it, you'll probably come across this. It's in all the studies, and I want you to take a good look at it. You can screenshot it if you want, and now I want you to forget it because it is crap. This definition on your screen is a whole lot of words that don't mean a whole hell of a lot. I am embarrassed to have written this definition. Do you know why? Do you know what supported decision-making really is? How do you make decisions? What do you do when you have to make a decision that you're not sure you understand? When you go to the doctor and the doctor talks jargon and you say, can you please explain that in plain English? Or when you have to go to the mechanic like I do and you don't understand cars, you call a friend like I do and say, is this a smart thing to do? When you have a relationship question that you're too close to and can't decide what to do, you call a friend. That's what we all do time after time. What supported decision-making is getting help from people you trust so that you can live your life. And everyone does it. You probably did it today. It's a good thing. Think about all of the cliches in our lives about making decisions. You can come up with 5 of them off the top of your head right now. Don't go off half-cocked. Don't make a snap decision. Make an informed choice. Get help. Ask for advice. All of these just mean use supported decision-making. When we're at work, when someone comes to me at work with a question, my first question is always, what have you done to try to figure that out yourself? Who have you talked to? Our bosses tell us to talk with our coworkers and get help. Our friends tell us to talk it out. It's exactly what we all do. So supported decision-making is just acting like everyone acts, with one difference. When people without disabilities do it, they're smart. They are making wise choices. They are getting help because they're smart. People with disabilities for 1,500 years, the second they say, I need some help, society assumes that means they can't do it. And if they can't do it, it means they assume they need a guardian. And what we know is that 90% of the time plus, they are going to lose all their rights. And here's the thing about Jenny. She had been using supported decision-making her whole life. Didn't call it that because who calls it that? We just call it making decisions. Think about it. She had signed that power of attorney. The attorney explained it. She understood it. When Jenny had to have back surgery, we asked, how did she sign the consent? And we were told she's needle phobic, so she almost didn't. But the doctor explained and her family said, Jenny, this is so important. And the doctor said it'll be one needle, and when you wake up, it'll be gone and you'll be able to walk better. Jenny understood and she signed. She signed her Medicaid waiver service plan because her case manager testified that they went over it page by page and line by line, and they explained it to her. And they said, the case manager said, Jenny understood it when we explained it. So time and time again, Jenny had used supported decision-making successfully. So we get down to the end of the case after a year, 6 days of trial, and we have what we call closing argument, where I got to live out all my Al Pacino fantasies and walk around the court and pound the table and pound the facts and pound the law. And the judge said, I will be back in 15 minutes with my ruling. And that gave me enough time to tell Jenny that we were going to lose, because I believed we were. Because that judge in that hearing in 2012 had said that he had a nephew with the same condition as Jenny, and he wanted that nephew to be protected. So we assumed there was going to be a guardianship. We had told Jenny we were going to win this case on appeal. So we told Jenny to be ready and to be strong. And sure enough, that judge gets back up on the stand and he starts reading his order. And God is my witness, the first 4 pages, and again, you can read them at jennyhatchjusticeproject.org. The first 4 pages are all about why she needs a guardian. So I went into lawyer mode and I rubbed Jenny's shoulder and said, you can be strong. We're going to fight this. And then I remember this like it was yesterday. Jenny said, he's going to send me home. She said that every time we went to court, he's going to send me home. And the judge said, however, no one ever wants to be on the wrong side of however. We were on the right side of however. The judge said, however, Jenny, you have not convinced me that you are ready to make all your own decisions in your life. So I am going to keep you in guardianship under 2 things and 2 things only: health decisions and safety decisions. Everything else, you have the right to make all the choices in your life. And we said, okay, start. Then the judge said, the guardians are not going to be your parents. See, I did not tell you about Jim and Kelly, Jim Talbert and Kelly Morris. Jim and Kelly were Jenny's employers. Jenny worked for them for 5 years. And when Jenny had her surgery and was going to be discharged from the hospital, she was not able to go back to her apartment. She needed rehab. She needed specialized furniture. And her parents wouldn't take her in. And I have no problem saying that. It's in the court record. Her parents refused to take Jenny in. You know who took her in? Jim and Kelly. Her bosses said, come live with us. And all through the case, Jenny said she wanted to live with Jim and Kelly. So the court said, yes, Jenny, you're going to be under guardianship for just these 2 things. But Mr. Talbert and Miss Morris are going to be your guardians. Better. And then the court said, and that guardianship is going to end in 1 year. And it did. In fact, we just passed the anniversary 2 days ago of when Jenny's guardianship expired. It ended August 3rd, 2014. For 6 years, she has been living and working and loving and having her life without a guardian, doing just fine. And then the court said 2 more things. They said, first, that the guardian's job, every guardian's job, not just Jim and Kelly, but every guardian's job, is not to make decisions in the place of the person, not to do things instead of the person, but to help the person make his or her own decisions using self-supported decision-making. That was the first time a trial judge ever used those words in the United States of America. And then he said one more thing. He said, get her home today and get her back to work. So Jenny Hatch walked into a courtroom in August of 2012 with all her rights, and she walked out 3 hours later with nothing. And Jenny Hatch walked out 1 year later like this. That is my favorite picture. It is Jenny coming out of the courtroom that day, knowing she is going back to her home, knowing she was going to have her rights back, knowing that her choices were what was important in her life. But I have to tell you, it's not just about this. I do love this picture and I do love this story, but I didn't tell this story just to show you this picture. No, we got to do more than that. Jenny Hatch's story is about more than Jenny Hatch, because you have to ask, why did Jenny get this? Why did Jenny get justice? And the answer is more complicated than you think. It's not just because she's awesome. It's not because she's special or an angel or anything else. It's because she had help. It's because she had support. Take away Jim and Kelly. Jim and Kelly hired their own lawyer. I was Jenny's lawyer. Jim and Kelly paid a lawyer something like $50,000. Who does that to come and fight for Jenny? She had Jim and Kelly. She had national organizations like the ARC, like NAMI, like the Bazelon Center, arguing that this young woman can do this. The media loved her. Can you imagine why? There was a reporter in Virginia Beach named Andy Fox who was telling Jenny's story long before I ever heard her. He is the unsung hero of Jenny's case. He called it the Justice for Jenny trial and made sure people knew that this young woman had rights. And she had a judge who was willing to listen and learn, who went from protection and conditions to supported decision-making. Do you know what that means? It means she got lucky. It means she got lucky. Take away Jim and Kelly, and Jenny is in that group home. Take away Andy Fox, take away the ARC, take away people on Jenny's side, and she is just like the million people under guardianship in the last 25 years. She is back in that group home, back in that sheltered workshop, snapping snaps together, in her words, in being bored. And that is the lesson we have to take out of Jenny's case. It's not just a good story. It's a lesson for all of us. Our rights, our justice, our self-determination cannot depend on being lucky. It cannot depend on who we know. It cannot count on us being blessed to have a Jim Talbert and Kelly Morris in our lives. We cannot hope for that. So we have to go forward. Up on your screen right now is the law in Virginia. This says when people need guardians. A person needs a guardian in Virginia when they are incapacitated. Look at the bold words. You are incapacitated when you are incapable of meeting the requirements of your health care or managing your property. Incapable. And I want you to think about that word. What does it mean to be capable? Is capable something you have or you don't? Are we always capable and always not capable? Of course not. Our capability depends on two things: what we've done before and what kind of help we have. There are some days when we are capable and some days when we are not. Have you ever been so stressed out that you thought, I can't make any major decisions today? You were not capable then. Have you ever faced something that you've never faced before and had to get help? You were not capable that day. Think about when we go to the doctor, because really, if capable is something you have or don't, then none of us, unless we are doctors or have medical degrees, are capable of taking care of our health care, because we don't have the knowledge and ability to diagnose ourselves and prescribe medications. So instead, because we lack that capability, we go to the doctor. The doctor is someone we trust. And because we have the help of that doctor who can prescribe a medication, who can diagnose us, who can tell us what we should do to get better, we are then capable of managing our health care. because we had the doctor's help. So what that means is before we ever think about guardianship, we got to ask two questions. And this is the first one. If you can only take care of yourself or take care of your property, if you have help, are you incapable? The answer to that has to be no. Because if it was yes, we'd all need guardians. So getting help is what makes us capable. And here is the second question. Before we think about guardianship, we've got to ask this question. What else have you tried? What else have you tried? Because before we can decide that someone is incapable, we have got to try something to make that person capable. 98% of the time, yes, I will concede, a person in a coma certainly is not capable. Everyone else, I suggest we should be trying something. That's not my position only. That is the position of the National Guardianship Association. That's guardianship.org is their website. They're made up of guardians, by guardians, for guardians. They train guardians. They have a code of ethics for guardians. There is nobody more invested in guardianship than the National Guardianship Association. And what they say is this: before trying guardianship, try something else. Try supported decision-making. You know why? It might work. And if it works, the person has self-determination and independence. If it doesn't work, maybe guardianship is appropriate, because supported decision-making, when it works well, can help people be capable the same way it helps all of us be capable. Again, think about what you use supported decision-making for: to weigh your options, to talk things out, to make sure that you're not making snap or unwise decisions, to help you understand the choices you have to make. That's what you use it for. And here's the big thing, and you know this already. There is no one way to use supported decision-making. It's a paradigm, I say, not a process. So if you're asking, okay, hippie, get to the point. How do I do it? Where's my form? Where's the app? There isn't one, and there shouldn't be one, because we all make decisions in different ways. We all need different types of help. So supported decision-making can be informal support. I sometimes call it a listening shoulder or a supporting person, someone I can bounce ideas off of. It can sometimes be more formal, like in a written plan, like a power of attorney, like an individual support plan. Something that says, I am going to work with Jonathan on finances. I'm going to share my budget every month to make sure I'm not overspending. I'm going to work with Justin on medical care because he is a nurse and he's going to go to the doctor with me and help us understand each other. And it can be as formal as what we call micro boards and circles of support, where we get together. We're like 5 or 6 people I trust. We all get together a couple times a month and we talk about my life. And you give me advice so that I can decide what the best course for my life is. All of these things are supported decision-making, all of them, because they all involve me getting help from you so I can decide how to live my life. So there is not one way to do it, but there are a couple of things that I call the supported decision-making commandments, the 3 of them. If you got these things, you got supported decision-making, and they're all easy. First one goes like this. We all agree right here, right now, that everyone has the right to make choices to the maximum of their ability. And that's just the Declaration of Independence, if you think about it. If you believe in the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you believe in that. The second, I can ask you for help with something without you deciding that means I can't do it. And that's easier even still, because we do that every day. And last, we all agree there are as many ways to give and get help as there are people. Plan A doesn't always work. Sometimes you gotta go to plan B, plan C, plan triple D, plan triple Q. Something might work. Nothing might work. And if nothing works, guardianship is probably appropriate, but we shouldn't rush into it. We shouldn't rush into it because we know from studies now that people who are using supported decision-making have more self-determination than people under guardianship. That's not rocket science. If I'm making my own decisions, with support from you, I have more control over my life than if someone else makes decisions in my place. And since we know from 40 years of studies that self-determination is the key to a good life for people with disabilities, doesn't this mean that 1,500 years of culture that says you have to have a guardian like that when you turn 18, that's enough. We can move forward together. And I'm always asked this question about safety. Can you guarantee me, Jonathan, that if I try this instead of guardianship, my son, my daughter, my mom, my loved one is going to be safe? They're not going to get taken advantage of. And I always say the same thing. No, I cannot guarantee safety. And in fact, I won't. I will guarantee you right now, someone is being taken advantage of, whether they have a disability or not. Someone is being taken advantage of by someone they trust. There is no way to guarantee safety. But here's something else I can tell you, that there has never been a study, not one, that has found that people are safe under guardianship or safer under guardianship. And there are horrific stories of abuse by guardians. That's not saying guardians are bad. That's not saying guardianship is bad. It's saying that people can be very bad. So if we know that people can get hurt either way, the one I'm at least gonna try is the one that is associated with self-determination, because that's associated with safety. The one I'm going to try is the one that the National Guardianship Association says we should try before guardianship. The one I'm going to try is the one that works for Jenny Hatch and has worked for so many other people. These are just some of the people that I've worked with to help come out of guardianship in favor of supported decision-making. This is Ryan King signing his power of attorney as the first person. He won his independence. He was under guardianship for 15 years, and he and his mom fought, and because they used supported decision-making, his guardianship was terminated, and that's a power of attorney protecting his rights. This is Tanya Powell, who was the person I told you about, who has diabetes. Her and her mom were fighting because her mom thought she had to be her guardian. But together, using supported decision-making, they walked out of the courtroom with the guardianship expired and them working as partners. This is Takora, who was living in a car because her guardian wasn't involved in her life and she had no right to sign a lease because she'd lost her rights. We worked together and the judge got rid of her guardianship and let her do supported decision-making, and now she is living and working independently. And we know that supported decision-making has taken root in just 7 years since Jenny's case. Just 7 years. 12 states have passed laws recognizing supported decision-making as an alternative to guardianship. The federal government has created the National Resource Center for Supported Decision-Making. I'm the project director of that, supporteddecisionmaking.org. And there are projects in literally every state seeking to empower people to make their own decisions, to live their own lives and be self-determined. In fact, right here in Virginia, you got a bunch of new laws get passed just last year that are in effect, that are empowering people to use supported decision-making. We're going to talk more about these tomorrow, but the Department of Education now has to tell students about supported decision-making and alternatives to guardianship. In a guardianship case, the guardian ad litem has to consider supported decision-making instead of just recommending guardianship, has to recommend it if it's appropriate. That means they have to explore it. Courts have to make sure that people have the right to make as many decisions as possible. And DBHDS has been required to and has convened a work group to study the use of supported decision-making and make recommendations. Virginia, where I submit to you supported decision-making was born in the modern times, is now stepping into the lead on how to do it best. And I am so proud to be working with the ARC of Northern Virginia on a pilot project that does just that. With Lucy Beednell of the ARC of Northern Virginia and so many others. We're working with 10 people with disabilities and their supporters. We have empowered them to make their own plans, not a form, not an app, not a book, not a method. They create their own plans. And then we see how they're doing. And the things that we have heard, we're going to publish on this hopefully by the end of the year. But people are telling us, one person said, I never felt like I had a voice before. So I had a mom say, I never knew he could do these things. I had a person say, I always felt like no one was listening, and now they are. And you can learn more about supported decision-making at thearcofnova.org. and you can learn about that project and see resources on how to do it. I want to just leave you with a couple of thoughts. Everything you've heard about today, I said, was backed by one of two things: law and science. But none of that matters if we don't start from a place of recognition. If we don't start by saying we recognize and we respect, we honor and we empower everyone's right to make choices. Without that, none of this works. None of it can work. And if we remember that, we can see that there are opportunities for supported decision-making all around us. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Ways to have supported decision-making in special education, employment, in person-centered planning, in medical care, in money management. We can bring these things together using supported decision-making and empower people from the beginning of life all the way to the end to have the best possible, most self-determined lives. That's our goal, after all. All of us, every single person with and without disabilities, giving and getting the help we all need to make the best possible decisions, the most possible decisions to the most of our abilities. When we do that, then all of us, people with and without disabilities, are going to have the same opportunities for success, the same rights. I asked you in the beginning to think about your rights. I asked you what your favorite ones were. You know what my favorite one is? Same one as everyone else's. Equal rights. And supported decision-making is a way to get us, after 1,500 years of culture saying people with disabilities can't do things, to a place at long last of equal rights. Thank you so much. I know I went a little bit over time, but I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions from anyone who might have anything they want to talk about.
Hello, everyone. Jonathan, thank you so much for this very, very inspiring and informative chat that you've just had with us. In the chat box, there are all kinds of emotions expressed, and be sure to tell Jenny that everyone is saying, yay, yay, go Jenny. Reed wants her to do a movie, and I'm not sure, is there a movie or a documentary out on her story?
There is not. At one time, I know there was talk about it, but it never came to fruition.
Okay. Well,
probably because they couldn't secure Brad Pitt to play me. We do look alike.
This is true.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
We've had some people on here express concern because they are under guardianship. So maybe you could give us a little bit of information about what someone could do who is under guardianship and they would like to have some changes made.
So under Virginia law, anyone can ask a court to change or end, the phrase is terminate a guardianship. The standard, and this is what we used in Jenny's case, is if a person is under guardianship but is no longer incapacitated. Remember the definition of incapacitated. And hopefully you can see this through the poll on screen. But that definition is a person who is incapable of managing his or her affairs. And what we said is that if Jenny was ever incapable, I don't believe she ever was, but if she ever was, she no longer is because she uses supported decision-making. So a person who wants to say that I don't need a guardianship would have to show that he or she is able to do the things on your screen. And I think most people can. Now, I tell people this all the time, the easiest way out of a guardianship is not to get in, but it doesn't mean you can never get out. There is just so much out there that can need to be done. Lots of plans to be made, and every case is different. So that's my way of saying that none of the things that we talked about today can work unless we talk together. So right up on your screen right now is my email. If anybody wants to talk about something like that, I can't guarantee I can take every case, but I will talk to you. I will give you advice. I'll give you some names, and that's the way we're going to make this work. There's no magic wand. I can't wave a hand and get you out of guardianship. Nobody can. But we can start to lay the groundwork for how you can present that to a judge, to show the judge that you are a person who can make your own decisions and should have your rights back. So jgmartin@law.syr.edu. or you can just ask the ARC. They've got my email. You could get me there as well.
Okay, great. I think that'll be very helpful to people. So we have gone over time, but the good news is that Jonathan will be with us again tomorrow. So I hope you'll be able to join. And this presentation, as is all of our presentations, will be on the website. You'll be able to go back to it and see and listen and hear it again. So thank you so much, Jonathan. This has been a very moving presentation for everyone who's here, and very appreciative of the good news that you have brought to people.
It has been my honor, and I look forward to speaking tomorrow. I'm going to put my email address in the chat as well.
Okay.
Thank you all. It's been an honor. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Thank you.